Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.
Hey, good afternoon. If you are in the Midwest, and by Midwest, I actually mean like the northern Great Plains all the way down into, I believe, Tennessee, it's cold out. We've got this fantastic high pressure system just pumping cold air down on us. Like straight from the Arctic all the way down. There's this big pink banana looking thing on the heat map. And it's going to stick around all week. It's supposed to hang out all the way through Christmas.
We'll see how much of it sticks.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue, is if it sticks to the ground.
Well, I think so far it's just supposed to be dry and cold.
Oh, no actual snow.
Yeah.
Report, because I saw some this morning, but it wasn't like.
Yeah, but that was like a rumor of snow.
Right.
Who knows? We might get some big billowy snow formation, but right now everything looks like it's just cold and dry, which is okay. Cold and dry I can deal with, because that doesn't mean tracking all sorts of salty, wet slurry around. In fact, I haven't seen any salt trucks at all. So it just hasn't been an issue. Like, it hasn't even been cold enough, really. Or wet enough. Which is crazy, because just like a week ago, it was just sopping wet. Maybe that was a bit more than that.
Well, but it's also really dry out.
Right now.
Yeah.
I think yesterday it was like 20% humidity, which is extremely dry.
Yeah, it's gotten down to like 30% in our apartment. It's like only extreme weather gets it. I mean, in terms of the dryness inside, like it's once you know how dry it can get, it's easier to deal with. But I don't think people would realize, like, well, even down to I made some meat pies yesterday, and I had to dramatically increase the amount of water in the recipe because the air was just so dry that, like, if I followed the recipe, it wasn't even nearly enough water.
That's actually that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, which is where I'm like, it affects, if it affects like dough like that, I can only imagine how it affects like the skin. Like, the skin does a great job of not letting fluids out, but only to a certain degree.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, okay, so I'm just having this kind of like mind expansion moment here. Like, there are entire like ranges of cooking that are ideal for, like, getting rid of water content, or cooking off the water, or for browning, or for any of these things. And now I'm thinking, like, I wonder how barometric pressure and ambient humidity also factor into these things. Because
I mean, 100% in that.
Oh, I know, but like, it hadn't occurred to me till this moment. It's like,
but I'm saying that they'll have like recipes for like people at elevation.
Oh yeah.
On the boxes where it's like, I think it's like
well, I know that
if
the
you're
boiling
above
temperature of
5,000
water.
feet, they'll change the temperature on the recipe a lot of times.
Yeah, you have to,
or maybe it's 3,500. I forget.
Once you get above a certain altitude, you have to because water boils at a lower temperature, you have to cook it longer. You have to heat it longer, or bring it. You have to really boil the crap out of it, because it might not actually achieve the correct temperature.
Yeah, so that's like definitely part of the equation. Well, and that's like the recipe I was looking at was Nigerian, so there,
Oh yeah, well,
I'm sure the humidity is like very different from Bloomington winter. you know,
you mean they have humidity in winter?
right? I don't even know if they have a winter. For that
Do
matter.
they? Yeah, do they even have winter? I mean, technically, it's like summer in the southern hemisphere, right? Something like that, isn't it?
They have wet season. It's hot throughout the year. Yeah. So that's like, I mean, and what is it? I think
They have hot, and then they have hot and wet. That's awesome. I would like warm or cool and dry, and then cool and no, and then warm and dry. with moderate humidity, like 40% to 50% humidity. That'd be good. I could deal with that. Be like fall or spring all day long.
they also have Harmattan season apparently, which is dry and dusty.
Well, that doesn't sound fun.
But I mean, no actual cold.
You know, I could put up with dusty for no cold. Not gonna lie. We can. There are there's air filtration and ionizers, and I can put up with dust. Maybe. Actually, no. I take that back. I can put up with cold because I can always put a sweater on. Not extreme cold though. I wouldn't want to live in a climate that's like whatever we've got right now in this instance. A balmy 31 degrees. If it was like 31 degrees all the time, that would just be like suffering. I read a
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I read this study, or I read about a study where they subjected patients to like 40-degree rooms, and all they were wearing was like a t-shirt and some shorts, sandals, no socks. You know, they all start shivering, and eventually, what they find is that through prolonged exposure to suboptimal temperatures, you know, hypothermia sets in, your organs start shutting down, and lo and behold, you know, your body starts to lose the ability to regulate itself. And then it pumps blood away from the core into the extremities to keep them functioning, but all that does is cool the core and then makes it harder for everything else to work. The lungs stop working right. And so, of course, the experiments all stop early before they, you know, actually cause harm to the patients or the participants. It's just crazy to me that people choose to live in places that are this cold all the time. You know,
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a choice so much as like somebody born into the Siberian culture.
That's true.
Like, how do you exit that? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
but people move to Alaska.
but I'm saying like somebody who grows up in like negative 40-degree temperatures, taking one shower a week, their life is constantly like hunting and gathering or like developing horticulture that works in their region to survive.
Yeah. You know,
How do they get out of that? Like
That's
you don't
true.
even have time to get out of that cycle, let alone like
Yeah.
I don't know if they want to get out of it, but that's where I've seen these like
I mean, I see it on YouTube and,
the
and
videos of them,
Netflix where people are
what it
like,
takes for them to like go get a shower. Because so if you're living in like negative 40-degree temperatures, well, your pipes are gonna freeze, so you can't actually keep free water. So they use big chunks of ice, and then they make fires and cool or boil the ice or get it like hot. So it takes like hours and hours to get enough water
just to bathe.
to be able to take a shower. So they do it once a week. But then when it's negative 40, you're not going to be sweating the same. So there's all these things like about their existence where it's like when you're born into that, like, how do you get out of it? Like, there's just so much demand on the daily existence that I can't even imagine. Like,
there's also a considerable amount of
thinking how to get
romanticization
out.
of that kind of lifestyle, and I see it on YouTube and Netflix, and you see these people who are going out into the wilderness and building, for contest too. Like this is a game to some people. Go out into the woods and survive, or go out in suboptimal climate conditions with a minimal amount of equipment and survive. And a lot of these people give up because they get like scratched or they scrape their leg or something like that. Something really, actually life-threatening in the woods. If you don't have a first aid kit, all you have is like a pocket knife and some rope. But people have created a whole fantasy about what you just described, what somebody who was born into that culture would just see as normal. Some people actually want to go do that. And I think that's like, personally, for me, it's a little insane, I guess. For somebody else, it might be exactly what they need. So I'm not trying to judge. That's all. I just think it's insane. I guess that is being judgy.
No, I mean, it's definitely like ridiculous for somebody to not be born into that to then try to go do that as if it's like
a good idea.
Yeah. Modern day amenities are not meant like they're meant to make the species proliferate, and when people lean on them, it makes them weak individually, but that's not an excuse to like then go live in the forest. That's not the logical next step in that series of scenarios playing out, because that's where like polarized discussion makes it really difficult not to have the reaction be just like, what's the complete opposite of this then? And then have the pendulum try to swing back and into the opposite direction, where now we're like, oh, instead of eating healthy and eating organic, it's like now you go live in the woods and you like don't take a shower except once a week, and you fish in the river and you have to use a stick to fish or else it's not kosher. And it's like whatever the arbitrary like swing back in the other direction is, it's like inevitably it always goes back the other direction because of how things work. Like, do you remember when like toed shoes were like all the rage in the mainstream, and then they fucking disappear, and it's like this shit's gonna come back eventually.
Toed socks still exist.
Oh, I mean, I still have some because it's like once you have toed socks, like the toed shoe is kind of redundant. I don't necessarily wear them all the time, but it definitely helps for me to like get toe mobility in this in like a better way. But that's like you don't need like the shoe to do that, and you don't even actually need the sock to do that necessarily. It just helps. But it's like the things that those shoes were meaning to do have some validity to them, but the like extreme reaction of like going full toed shoe, then society's like goes back in the complete opposite direction, and then like, not to say that nobody wears those anymore, but there's such a reaction to them that it's like stores stop carrying them, or it's like really difficult to get them because they're not as profitable, because it's not as much of an aesthetic fad or preference now. So it's like,
so I understand why like a muck boot exists, you know, like the neoprene boot that goes up to your leg and then has like a rubber shell around your foot area. I understand why that exists. And I understand why a pack boot exists, which is basically like a shell with a liner booty that goes inside. And then big hiking boots and insulated boots. I understand why all those exist. Even and then like further down, like why a trail runner exists, like essentially a really hardcore running shoe with kind of like a hiking boot inspired sole. I get that too. And then all of the training shoes, like for tennis, which have enhanced toe cup areas so that they don't like split. The sole doesn't split off of the shoe itself. I get that. And baseball cleats and football cleats and soccer cleats, basketball shoes, all of like the purpose, a design driven footwear makes sense to me. And I also see why like climbing shoes are designed the way they are, because it was explained to me. If I had just looked at them first, though, I'd have thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. But now it does. The thing that I always thought was really interesting about the toe shoe was there were times when I would go exploring these limestone outcroppings where a climbing shoe is not going to help because there's too much moss. And most of the time a tennis shoe is insufficient no matter how much tread it actually had, because you can't actually grab anything like you are when you're barefoot. But you really don't want to walk barefoot around these places because there's sharp shit everywhere. So I always thought that would be like the best thing for those, best use case for them. But I never actually had a pair of them. I tried a pair on once. They were really interesting. It felt like it felt like the difference between driving a normal front wheel drive car and then getting into an all wheel drive vehicle for the first time. That's kind of what it felt like, because my toes were like,
yeah, that's what it's like.
Completely
Have you ever
in
tried
contact.
a Tabi? Have you tried a Tabi?
I don't know. I can't.
Tabis are better because it's like you don't really need all the individual toes separated. You just need the big toe and the other four.
Oh, like a ninja foot.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's like, you know, that way precedes the toed shoe by like hundreds of years, which is why it's like a superior design anyway. But that's where I'm saying like the complete toed shoe as like a modern extreme response, then like the counterpoint to that is like the extreme high heel that really, you know, it's like I think 6 or 7 inch, but it's like that would be the extreme opposite of that shoe, not like another tennis shoe. It's like you want to look at those in comparison to like tennis shoes and what they're meaning to do, but the opposite of the toed shoe would actually be like an extreme high heel that only has one toe box.
Or maybe those calf trainers that have just one giant hoof like thing.
Right, or something like that. Yeah, but that would be like the actual extreme opposite, because it's not just about toeing or separating the toes, it's about getting a lower profile between the heel, like the heel and the toe. So there's like sometimes the lowest you can get is like a millimeter. I mean, it may even be more than that, but it may be like 2 or 3 millimeters or something. But the closer you can get to not having any difference between the distance between your heel and the ground and the distance between your toe and the ground, if those distances can get as close to equal as possible, that's better for getting someone a better sense of getting closer to the ground. But the lower that is, the less protection they have from things like rocks or sticks or whatever poking through. So then that's the issue of like, how much can you balance protection from the outside with that need to get closer to the ground? So this is like the lowest profile shoes are only going to really be fit for like use in the gym, because the sole isn't going to be thick enough for you to run around on a bunch of rocks without them poking through. So in theory, you'd think that the like thinnest thing is going to give you the best like grip, but because it needs actual protection, it's like you actually need a thicker sole for like cross training on real terrain. So then those toed ones have like twice as thick of a sole as the ones that are meant for the gym. So I've gone through
Man, I
the
remember
ones for
real
inside
gym
and the ones
shoes.
for outside, and it's like there's a big difference.
Man, I remember like I had a pair of gym shoes once. They had like basically they had very little padding, and the sole was like this very thin piece of rubber that wrapped around the back of the heel. And they were meant for like what's that? There's like an exercise where you basically run back and forth with like 10 meters. I remember doing this across like a basketball court many times. Those shoes were like the best at that. They could like pivot.
They called them suicides, which is like a terrible name for an exercise.
Okay, well that's a terrible name. That's absolutely terrible. But it's like those shoes could pivot, and I wouldn't tear at my ankles. But as soon as I tried it, and even a pair of high tops, which you'd think would be like ankle support, it would wreck my ankles. Any other shoe, like just trying to do that one kind of really fast turn around really hard and abruptly, just wrecked my ankles. So I really just decided I'm not going to try and excel at this because it just hurts. That's one of those things that I don't think that was ever explained adequately in middle school or primary physical ed class. It's like, oh yeah, don't do this if you injure yourself. I'm sure that physical education educators now are more in tune and pay closer attention, because
I would hope, but
yeah, I would hope.
It's like really difficult to know, because then I think about it, like even then, the way that they ran physical education was like really geared towards the top 10% of the athletes, and then everybody else just kind of had to try to keep up.
Yeah,
which is not, in the context of what it's trying to do, it's not horrible, but it could have been way better in terms of not just being something that like ends up stroking the like the athletic kid's ego already. Because then it's like, well, everyone has things that they could work on in terms of getting stronger, and like nobody has a muscle group or no one has a body that doesn't have a weak muscle group somewhere. Everyone has an underdeveloped or underworked muscle group, because of it's just impossible to keep everything perfectly balanced, because the body starts compensating when you start to like overwork one area. So then the body's natural predisposition to be really good at compensating for overwork is why it's actually it's like impossible to be perfectly symmetrical, which is why people compete to be perfectly symmetrical. And when they do compete, they're in the worst shape in that like period.
Oh yeah, they're like dehydrated and
yeah. So it's like they go to the extreme of destroying their body to then appear symmetric, but because they're on the verge of organ failure, that's not actually symmetric in the health like vector. It's like you have to. I think they should look at people's like blood tests when they're on stage. That should be part of the judging, because it's like if somebody's on the verge of organ failure, they should be fucking disqualified.
Yeah.
No matter how good they look.
They're not healthy. Well, this is kind of interesting. Last night I was talking to a buddy of mine about the game Civilization and how you can have a really balanced society and survive and achieve a lot of things, but there's actually a path to like getting off the planet in space flight. And how, when I was younger, we didn't know that path even existed for a while. And then once we did, the whole goal was to leave the planet and leave all this warring crap behind. And it turns out that if you focus too much on war, you can't get off the planet. There are some things that are necessary, like you got to develop rockets, of course, and trigonometry and calculus and all sorts of things like that, math. But if one develops their civilization to be too warlike, they're just going to end up destroying themselves or ruining the planet or destroying the planet, destroying everything. I mean, is it even possible to have a balanced society anymore? Can we even have that? Like, everything's gone to extremes. Like, all of our entertainment is like some hyperbolic extreme of going out into the woods and surviving. There's nothing simple about it. And then like all of the car stuff, it's like the most let's take the nastiest thing we can and pump a bunch of money into it and then sell it for 4 times what we put into it. Nobody has those resources for real. I mean, a few people do, obviously, because they have the shows on Discovery Channel and all over the internet. You can find this stuff everywhere. Some people have figured it out, of course, but it's not really real. It's like the most extreme version of something is still an outlier for what usually happens. Just like the least extreme version of something is also kind of an outlier because it usually doesn't happen. Like all of the stuff
it's like maybe that, I feel like entropy makes that eventually fizzle out back to the middle.
Well, it should.
Theoretically, unless it like explodes at one end and everybody dies, which then basically becomes a functional reset to zero. But that's where I'm like, okay, just assuming that like if humans wiped ourselves out, but not every other species, I wonder if like another species would become like self-aware and then go through a different cycle. Because it's like we're not
well,
we don't have a lot of empathy like naturally, but if another species that naturally is more empathetic, like empathic, became self-aware and then became the one that like grew society, I wonder how much different it could possibly turn out, like starting from humans wipe themselves out, because like
that's
possible.
I was watching this video about how species form and some clades just disappear, and it turns out that these clades last about 10 million years, give or take, a few 100,000 years, and humanity is 200,000 years into itself, and our technology is all essentially gained within the last 5,000 years. Literally all of our technology is essentially within the last 5,000 years. I mean, I guess we could say that like stone, like flint knapping might be a little older, but starting fire with some sticks, that's older. But all of our real technology is relatively young in comparison to how long humans have, well, the Homo genus has been around. And so it's completely realistic that some other species could develop just as far as Homo sapiens have. We haven't been around that long. And this planet's been around a long fucking time. And there have been plenty of extinction events, like entire planet-wide extinction events that wiped out all life, and then life reemerges because the unique combination of stuff here. So I'm not sure a full reset would actually be a bad thing.
No, I don't think it would be a bad thing at all.
It'd probably be good for the
I
planet.
I don't think that where we're at would be inevitable if a different species like arose, because that's where the way people would make it seem is as if like the things that we're doing right now are, it's just the way things would go. And it's like, I think that's a byproduct of like extreme selfishness as a necessity to survive in a place that has a social aspect and an individual aspect that are often at odds with each other. And I think that's the issue where society seems to have a problem with individuals and just in general. It doesn't even matter which side you're on or what we're talking about. Like society is going to have somebody in a group who has a problem with that individual existing, at least where we are. And it's like, there's something about the polarizing or the polarized nature of our existence that I think leads to that, which is, I don't think innate to all species. Like every species isn't going to their extreme opposite constantly, whereas we are like, it's just constantly moving back and forth between extremes, which is like, that's the nature of us. But it's, I think it's an overstep to start making that seem as if that's the nature of everything, as if nothing can work in harmony long term. And it's always like polarized pendulum swings.
Yeah, I mean, my cats and dogs sleep together. I see videos of people who are raising big cats that can't be put in the wild and can't be put in zoos because they're too small. And they live with dogs and go to like dog training schools. So they're socialized with other animals and they're well behaved. They have like dog step siblings that they lay around with and clean and don't kill. If cats and dogs can figure out how to coexist, surely humans can learn to live with each other, right?
You would think. Hopefully.
I mean, there's a guy in LA who has a dog that walks around with a cat that rides on its back, and there's a mouse that rides on the back of the cat, and they all live in harmony. So clearly, there's a path to coexistence. It's not the scorpion and the frog. It's way cooler. The world doesn't have to be the scorpion and the frog.
Yeah.
Everyone can be a frog. Nobody has to be a scorpion.
That's such a defeatist allegory.
I know, it's so sad. But it's in my nature.
I just happened to see a Voyager episode where they used the allegory yesterday.
Oh.
Or I saw I've seen the episode a bunch of times, but I happened to watch it yesterday.
Yeah, it's in recent memory.
So it's like anytime somebody says it, it's like, oh, you've given up already, huh? Like it's tapping out before we even enter the fray. This is like I'm just giving up on human nature. Nobody can be changed.
Oh man, that's such a bullshit story.
Yeah.
In the real world, the frog says, "Fuck, it's a scorpion. I'm get the fuck out of here." Also, the scorpion probably just crawls across the bottom of the water and emerges on the other side. Also, the idea of scorpions and frogs coexisting in an environment is really strange to me.
Well, there's a lot of things are clearly meant to be allegory, and then when they get taken literally, like by the literalists, it's like, okay, hold up, you guys, you know that's an allegory, right? And they're like, wait, what's an allegory?
Man, so many stories from childhood that I haven't thought about since because either they were stupid or I completely forgot like the entire message behind them and only remember them casually.
Well, and that's like the nature of conflict. Like if you look at the Russian-Ukrainian war, like as we go into the winter and the war cools off ish.
Is it though? I mean, Russia keeps carpet bombing.
Ish. And that's what I'm saying, like ish. And it's like not completely, but it's definitely less advancing on the Russians' part. Like they just can't keep advancing. So this is more they're doing carpet bombs of places that they're trying to keep hold of or just trying to terrorize altogether. So it's like that's pretty normal for like winter tensions, but again, they can't keep advancing, and the advance like had stopped before winter had even started. So there are certainly predictable things about the way humans behave in terms of like, yeah, there's obviously a certain type of human nature, but then acting as if those things can't be changed becomes an excuse not to change them. So I think that's the issue of like not, when we use military industrial history as the litmus for looking at all of history, then it becomes easy to make it seem as if humans are perpetually in conflict, but really it's like 195,000 years, not necessarily conflict free, but just not large scale, massive global war conflict.
Well, there was the whole era of barbarism that preceded the the classic era where there's no real history, but they also didn't really have written languages the way that were preservable.
It doesn't need to be written to be preserved, which is why most of human history is oral.
Yeah.
That's like the issue of like framing it as if writing is like immutable. It's not. And
I know.
It's not actually.
We've talked about the Aboriginals and their
right, but I'm saying like
oral history.
Writing is not even in the context of like non-Aboriginals. Like most history is like been recorded orally, and then writing is like a recent way to preserve those things in more accessible manners, not necessarily like oral tradition didn't go away.
No.
And if anything, it's like the oral tradition just became the more esteemed type of transmission because it's much more difficult to access. So it's like getting an oral account from a griot directly is a much higher esteemed act than like reading a book. And it's like one is not more accurate than the other when it's like an actual historic griot that's like passing down a story that has been preserved through oral tradition, but it's like somebody telling a story is not the same as somebody who's trained in oral traditions. And that's like the same as somebody who writes is not the same as a historian. You know what I mean? Just because you know how to write doesn't make you a historian. Like,
oh man, not all historians are writers either.
right. And that's like, you know, by default, in that history does not include embellishment by nature. So story embellishment should not be present in historical account. So if we're just sticking to pure facts and relaying historical accounts, it's not going to be as embellished as something that is meant to be hyperbole, but understood in the context of knowing it is hyperbole. Because this is also where like griots will use hyperbole and will use embellishment to make the story more interesting, with the understanding that it's known that they are embellishing and it's known that they're using hyperbole. Like if somebody's like the king of all kings, they don't really mean that like, oh, this is like the one king of all time. It's like,
Well, it's like Galaxy Quest isn't supposed to be historical records, but the entire story is built upon the premise of an alien civilization that intercepts television transmissions and decides that those are the basis for its society. Right, that's like a super embellished story being translated as history. That's not the goal.
yeah. I mean, and it depends on the context, because that's where it's like, yeah, like that specific instance, it's obviously a misinterpretation. But the issue is the expectation aligned with the presentation? Because it's like if somebody's going into an oral presentation with the expectation that it's just going to be purely anal facts, work like one fact to the next with no color, then that's an improper understanding of the presentation, which then makes it hard or impossible for the audience and the presenter to get an understanding of each other. And that's where if somebody then goes to an anal expecting some embellishment and some like color and something interesting, and it's like, no, this is boring as shit, because they're just going through the events, event by event. This is what happened, and this is what happened next, and then this happened, which is why some of the Bible verses are more anal and just like chronological documents, whereas others are prose, and then some are full on just parables that are not meant to be taken, like parable or allegory, that are not meant to be taken 100% literally, but in presenting the context, it's that their presentation is meant to explain something else. Like the parable of the Good Samaritan is like, well, just because somebody is in a situation where society is like taking advantage doesn't mean you should stop being good. Whether the Good Samaritan was a real story or not is irrelevant, because the parable has a higher meaning than just recounting those events. So that's where it's like, if somebody looked at the Good Samaritan story and is like, well, what happened next? Did he go file a police report? Did he go, I mean, you know, at the time it's not called the police, whatever. You know, if the person's like looking to a parable for sequences of events to then find out what happened next or what happened previously, then their expectations are misaligned. So that's, again, it's, I think that inability for the audience to adjust their expectations is why you get literalist Christians. who don't understand like how to recontextualize the Bible into like some parts aren't written the same way as other parts, and some parts are meant to be historically documenting things and other parts are not, but it's all not meant to be a historical document, but some parts are. And being able to like parse which is which, or rather not being able to parse which is I think why we end up getting a lot of literalists. Because okay, think about this. How many Chinese people have you ever met that thought Dynasty Warriors was real? Not the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but the Dynasty Warriors. You know what I'm saying? I've never met a Chinese person thought Dynasty Warriors was real. Like, that's kind of the equivalent of people who think Jesus was a real person.
Oh my goodness.
And was like doing magic and shit.
I think
like,
Chinese culture understands that these are like, that the mythology is fantasy. That nobody actually jumps.
Not to say that Zhao Dun couldn't get hit in the eye with an arrow
and live.
Fight later and like live, yeah. But it didn't happen the way that they said it did in the Romance of Three Kings. No fucking way.
Yeah.
Bullshit. I'm just calling bullshit. Not to say that he didn't get shot in the eye and he didn't get like fight and live later. But it's not the same way the embellishment of the Romance of Three Kingdoms happened, and especially not the way the Dynasty Warriors did it. But that's all. It's in the title, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. They're romancing. They're like hyping it up. They're embellishing. That's not lost. So anybody who reads it and understands what romance means, they know that they're like giving it extra love in terms of how they're presenting it. So it's not hidden. It's not like the exact events of the Three Kingdoms. It's like, no, we're gonna make one of them seem like they're a magician, and this guy's gonna get in the eye with an arrow, and he's gonna continue fighting because that's way cooler than him going and getting medical attention. Like, or what? Did he just like chop off the arrow and fucking like something stupid in the way they recount it? But it's like, no, that didn't fucking happen. That didn't happen the way that they said. But something like he definitely got shot in the eye. That part definitely happened because I think there's even a body or some shit where they like have the proof that this dude actually existed and that someone got shot in the eye in that period who was called Zhao Dun. There's certain things where you go like, these parts did happen.
Oh, there's an extensive like
definitely didn't happen.
There's an extensive chronicle of Chinese history and real life heroes and what they actually did. But then there's also a parallel like exploits of these people to spread the legend. People want to know about these things. This shit happened. And by the time, it's like the telephone game from when we were kids. By the time it gets around the circle, the message has changed a little, but sometimes it's changed a lot. It might still be, you might still be able to discern what the original message might have been, but it changes. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
But that's where, again, I've never met a Chinese person that thought Dynasty Warriors was meant to be real and use that as their like basis for how they represented that part of their history. And that's where it's like, if somebody got to the abstraction of the Dynasty Warriors video game and was like, oh yeah, this is 100% accurate, this is real, this is like what happened, that person would not be taken seriously in any venue. So like, I don't understand.
And that actually says a lot about the people who play like was it Call of Duty and just go to the zombie mode. Like when that's the game of choice, like zombie, like how many waves of zombies can you survive? That tells me quite a bit. I hate those kinds of levels on any game. when it's just wave after wave of the same thing, but more every time. It's like, what? This isn't a level. This is just grinding. Not even fun grinding. And it's not like a racing game, which is grinding the entire time, where it's essentially a real time, constantly adjusting things on like a fine tuned, almost surgical level, so that you can get through some challenge course or dealing with other vehicles. It's just like twitch one way, twitch another, hold down a button, press a different button, throw a grenade, strafe, duck, roll, shoot some more.
It's hard to know if some of these developers play their own games, because there's parts where it's like the fun just stops and then you're stuck in this grinding cycle. And it's like, why am I here? I came here for fun, but I have to do this thing to get back to the fun. And it's like, I don't know if I want to continue.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it ends before you turn it off. But there's games where I get in those like little ruts of developers not paying attention to the fun levels. And it definitely, every time it happens, it's like, man, is this me or is this them? And I always have to make sure that I like make it's them. It's not
it's
me.
Totally
it's
them. When the only thing that changes is the map and then the color of the bad guys' accents. It's totally the developers. Especially when it's just the accent of whatever you have to shoot. If it's just like the color of their armor or their keffiyeh or their helmet or the type of gun they even use. Like if that stuff changes just slightly, oh, it's a different person. They've got different stuff going on, but really it's the same tune, has the same basic.
And it's like I know how the sausage is made, but as long as someone spices it correctly, it doesn't matter because it tastes good. So like this is where knowing how video games are made doesn't make it impossible to have fun. I don't think that's the case.
They're just not trying hard enough.
That's it. And ultimately, because they know if they have a certain franchise name on it, people are gonna buy the shit out of it anyway. Like, oh, if it's Call of Duty, oh yeah, we'll just skin the old game, put a new zombie mode on it, fucking sell 10 million to 20 million copies. Next game comes out 6 months later, same fucking shit. Oh, now it's in World War II. Now we'll go back to World War I. Now we'll go to Future War because they can't go to Vietnam.
Nope.
And they never do. So it's like the Korean War. They can't go there. So they keep going back to fucking World War I and World War II. And then the future. And then it's back to World War I. And then, oh, no, I forgot. They throw in the
Gulf War II.
Imaginary Cold War going hot, and then the Iraq War. They've started to like test the waters with that, but it's still too soon, and it's still not in good taste. I mean, it's never going to be in good taste, but the people who are still alive, like, and still remember it, are like, yeah, I don't think that's cool. Like,
yeah, I mean, even Wolfenstein had
like,
to imagine a version where the Nazis won, and there was backlash, even though we got to kill more Nazis.
Which is like, okay, but Call of Duty, they actually hire veterans to help with their game development. So it's not like Call of Duty is, I mean,
that's actually really cool.
They are exploiting it. Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people do. So it's not actually the worst case scenario. So I'm not gonna like act as if they don't do that part, which is where they didn't fucking create the military. So I can't blame the Call of Duty people for like the military industrial complex existing. Like them exploiting it is one thing. That's a whole different conversation. But like the fact that they give veterans jobs to help with their video game development is like, I guess that's the most commendable part of what they're doing. In all of the like cringe fucking capitalist exploitation, at least veterans who come back can like, I mean, not everyone, but some of the people can help out with this like video game process, but then it makes me like, if what would it take to get to a point where the best people did the conflict in a virtual space and it was as good as a real world conflict? Because we already have, our military has a esports team now. So it's like, well, I'm sure Russia's going to get a fucking esports team, and then China's going to get an esports team. And then it's like, then our militaries are competing in esports. So why the fuck do they need to keep killing each other in real world if we're going to put our military in like enough of the people in the military have some luxury time that some of them are in the esports now. And like I said, the Scorpion, if we're going to play that defeatist, eventually Russia's going to get in it too. And eventually China's going to get, if they're not already. And eventually our militaries are going to be competing in esports against each other, unironically. So like,
what? And they're going to be conducting cyber warfare against each other's esports teams.
Right, of course. But that's what I'm saying. Like, at what point, what does it take to get all of it there? Because it's like, if we're going to do some of, like, they can acknowledge that there is some value in putting some military people there to compete. Why not just put it all fucking there? So it's like, they know that this is the future. They know that the remote drone that kills people in real life should only be killing virtual people in the first place, in the sense of like, that is actually the future of warfare, not what they want, not them. The poorly written sci-fi people want us to think in terms of like the Terminator robot attacking us. It's like, no, it should if we're talking about the far future, it should be like robots versus robots. And if the robots were fucking smart, they wouldn't actually waste their physical bodies, so it'd be digital. Then the robots would just be, they'd be running simulations too. And it's like, oh, if we lose the simulation, we lost. There's no reason to actually lose any physical.
Yeah. Why commit any physical resources?
Then we just need to move forward from this lost scenario, which is technically the impetus for the fucking nuclear weapons, right? That's what they're claiming the goal for the nuclear weapons is oh, if we all have them, then we can just stop. Like, this is like the end all be all. If we know we all did them, we die. So then we move past it. It's like, well, that should be technically how we look at everything else and move everything into digital. Even it's like, why would you even want to kill the digital avatars and not just do sports then? Because if we can do a game where nobody dies, why not do that instead of someone having to die? Even if it's a fucking digital representation. So like, the notion of continuing to have to do real world war when we know our governments are actively investing into esports, it's like, let's just put it all into esports now. Let's just go directly to esports.
It sucks because to get people on board with nuclear technology, they have to develop bombs instead of developing energy. And now we're finally getting some kind of energy out of it. But like, there are all these fuel to energy transmission or translation programs that exist that rely on developing ways to turn fuels into energy. So in the hopes that when we do get some kind of facility on another moon or another planet, hopefully we're able to translate the native materials into a material that can generate energy to power our machines, our robots. Because I don't think any humans are going to go to Titan, and I don't think any humans are actually going to go to Enceladus. I just don't think that's happening anytime soon. But we can definitely send robots there. We can definitely send robots to Mars. But we got to power them somehow. And Mars is close enough to the sun that they can get some electricity from that. But one dust storm is enough to knock one of our robots out for some extended period of time. So I don't know. It just seems like it just seems really unfortunate. And granted, there was that big fusion breakthrough the other day, which from what I've gleaned, it still puts us maybe 30, 40 years out from when we're actually going to be able to reap the real material benefit of generating electricity from that process.
That's not that long.
No, it's really not.
That's closer than when we were able to like harness electricity in the first place. So like we're closer in time to that than our species is distant from when we first harnessed it, which is pretty fucking crazy. Like until that happened, it was the opposite. You know what I mean? Like in the sense of, because
the first nuclear
that technology
reactor
was, well, I'm saying in terms of like
just from going from electricity, yeah. But our first nuclear reactor was made
viable
3 years before we dropped bombs on Japan.
But the way that it happened wasn't viable because of the risks of meltdown, and it's like there's all these reasons as to why the prospect of the technology was only a promise and not a reality, whereas now it's like much closer to a reality without having as much of a negative repercussion on the potential downsides. And that's like that change.
1951 was the first reliable nuclear energy reactor,
which now they have them in submarines and shit. So it's not like we haven't been using nuclear reactors. It's a matter of getting it to a point where a regular person's home is going to be powered by fusion.
Yeah.
And that's like, we are much closer in time now to a regular person's home getting powered by fusion than the initial harnessing.
And they're going to have to do a lot to our infrastructure, because like what happened not too long ago, those two substations were shot up and it blacked out a whole area for an extended period of time. That shouldn't be able to be. That shouldn't happen. That kind of thing shouldn't even be able to happen at all. If we're going to have nuclear power and deliver reliable energy to people everywhere,
I mean,
I wonder what kind of.
It's not like somebody could just go in and shoot a fusion reactor.
That's true,
you know what I'm saying?
But they can still
They
can still shoot the step down transformer at the before it gets to populated areas. We still have.
That's just poor design. That's all that is.
Well, just because we've got an ancient architecture for our infrastructure. That's the real problem.
There's been
instead of designing a brand new one, they've just retrofitted new equipment into the existing system, which is. Fuck, how old is our electrical grid? Pretty old.
I mean, strong windstorms can take some of the systems out. So it's like, yeah, we've got a lot of work to do. Yeah, that's
1882 is when the first distribution system was installed in the United States. God.
But I'm pretty sure they were doing natural gas before that, though, right?
Yeah, they were, but the electrical grid itself, I'm sure the natural gas pipelines have been replaced at least once since then.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think it would be the same pipelines at all in most cases, because it's like private companies versus what would have been. Well, I mean, I guess some of them would have been private, but at least there were going to be like more uh, metropolitan plans that included natural gas
Man,
lines
from
where
60 years, from 1882 to 1942, that's how long it took to develop nuclear power. From like the water wheel to the freaking unstable fusion or fission reactor. So 60 years, 70 years. 70 years to produce nuclear power that was stable. That's unreal. Like that's I guess that gets back to the what I was talking about earlier about all of our technology is actually very recent. It 140 years to get to fusion from the water wheel. That's nothing.
yeah, which again, that's why like
That's absolutely nothing.
that tech being commercially viable in like 30 years is nothing.
The Chinese had freaking kite-based fortresses that they launched rockets off of. Like for hundreds of years they could do this before anyone thought to get into an airplane or send anything into outer space. Like we went from water wheel to nuclear fusion in 140 years. That's so cool.
But it's also what recently happened is not just about the fusion, it's about the fact that they can control it into a reaction that then gets a net positive output more than what was put in terms of energy. So that's like we've had the fusion and the reactions and fusion reactors, but the capacity to keep the controlled reaction
Just didn't exist.
And it was the materials that were needed to create a fusion reactor ended up being so that it wasn't a net gain in energy result, which is where it's like going from like 99% efficiency to 104% or 140% efficiency is like a difference in how our physics works in terms of being able to overcome entropy, which is also where like it's not just necessarily about the fusion, and that's like I think there's like a lot of laser refraction that is involved in like capturing the energy too. Like what was it? Like the Large Hadron Collider has a lot of laser refraction in it too, which is where building up power can come from amplification, but if the amplification demands too much resource, then it like negates the amplification itself. And that's like you'll see this in like subwoofers, like for cars. You have to basically get amplifiers to get more power to be able to output, but you also then have to get more battery because it's like 1,000 watt output is not going to be able to be amplified for an infinite output. So it's like you may have to, and then
Eventually you have to get a bigger alternator.
Right. Yeah. Or just put on a different
give it its own alternator.
Yeah.
I knew a guy that did that. He had a Park Avenue, which
some of them had to go.
He had a monster, like a 4,000 watt system, or 4,000 watts just in his trunk, and he kept killing batteries. And at one point, he had like a dual battery system, but it wasn't enough. And it turned out that the alternator just couldn't handle the load that he was putting on it. So he ended up getting, like, I think he said a truck alternator, and it still didn't do it. So he added a second alternator. I didn't even realize that was possible. But that solved his problem. It's a lot of effort to put a subwoofer in a car.
Which a subwoofer is just basically a glorified transformer.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. How much heat can we produce?
Yeah.
No, it really is. It's the whole everything that goes into translating electricity into music has always fascinated me. Like even before we start addressing the kind of electrical signal we're feeding into the whole system, just the idea of, hey, let's add some more electricity to this micro voltage signal and turn it into like a really huge signal that these pieces of paper or polymers or aluminum can use to rattle your brain cage. But there really is something to be said for just any properly designed audio playback system. You know, some people get into the room that they're listening to music in, and some people get really into listening to the sound of their speakers and their amplifiers, and some people are just into listening to music and they don't care where they listen to it. It can be on earbuds or giant speakers. They might actually prefer a gigantic PA surrounded by thousands and thousands of people, but, you know, I think it's all fun on some level. If it wasn't, people wouldn't get into it, right? Like if it like just with games, when it becomes tedious, people tend to give up. It isn't fun. Why do it?
Yeah. Man.
But then the tribalism emerges, like the audiophiles who will only listen to something that is being run through Class A amplifiers, or the people that don't listen to music except at concerts. Like they only go to concerts. Actually, that might be the truest form of a music fan. Or maybe they're fans of the musician.
How would such a thing even be possible? That doesn't even seem like a plausible.
Yeah, it really doesn't. Like after I said it out loud, I thought, it's like, wait, that can't even exist.
Like, how would you know if you liked something if you're only going to their concerts for the first time? It's just like, yeah, I don't know if that.
Yeah, that can't exist.
Well, and it's like it'd be maybe if they're in like Vegas where there's shows all day, but
or if they went to a festival to hear one artist and they ended up listening to 20 other bands waiting for that one artist.
Well, but that's the issue is like there's not music constantly being played, and you can only really go see it either when a concert's happening or if it's like live music at a venue. When the venue's open, that's usually at night. So That's what I mean. Like, I couldn't just go hear somebody play a song right now if I wanted to. Like, I'd have to wait until...
You'd have to go way out of your way to hear a song right now being performed live by somebody. But you could.
Like, not in Bloomington, though.
Oh,
that's
no.
what I'm saying. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you were in Vegas, maybe...
someplace that does not sleep.
Where there's like, but there's also shows constantly in rotation, and during like all hours of the day.
Yeah, like, the person that has two shows at 7 o'clock. Who does
karaoke before like dark? You know, like where is there somebody? I mean, you'll see it in like Korea or some shit. Like, and then hipster places in America, like they have this, you know, there's a karaoke bar down the street from us, but it's like it's gonna be the Korean population going there, not necessarily like non-Korean people, or the like local population in Bloomington isn't the one that goes to the Korean.
I'm just imagining
or
like
the,
like local high school students going to the karaoke place and doing like I don't even know whatever's on the radio right now.
Yeah.
Or some really like some crazy something crazy. Some Kanye or Cardi B or something with explicit lyrics. Really into it.
Well, and it's like it just happens to be in like there's like an Asian market, and then there's like a Korean restaurant, there's a Chinese restaurant.
Oh yeah.
Like right in this area. So it's like it's like a very
The
Asian
10th Street Mall.
block. Yeah. So it's not actually out of the ordinary for there to be a karaoke place there. But in the sense of like
a karaoke bar at the mall.
You're not gonna find karaoke bars everywhere. It's like we actually have like a significant Asian population.
I'm trying to imagine like karaoke at the mall.
I mean, they were doing that shit for a while in the 90s, and then they had the whole add the music video to it. Because I remember seeing them in real life where it was like...
Well, I remember seeing the music video thing at Circle Center once, but I only ever really saw it
for
like
a while because it was so expensive that nobody actually ever did it. I think it was like I want to say it was like $30 or something.
They really made fun of that really well on Community.
Yeah,
with the Kissed by a Rose episode.
Mm-hmm. Where it's like that shit existed for a very brief period. I feel like they had it at Block Party too. But that's even like Block Party. It was weird. The gradient of things that you could go into Block Party and then not be able to do because it was so expensive. Like the video games would range. Some of them would be like 50 cents, and then some of the games would be like $4.
Yeah.
And then there was like the 4D experience that was like a ride, and then they must have charged like 15 or something for that, but it couldn't have been longer than 20 minutes. So the idea of going into Block Party and spending like $100 on a couple hours of entertainment, it's something you can do once if you're not rich, but they were expecting people to be there constantly. And after the novelty wore off, it was like only wealthy people, or you're not like super wealthy, but like middle upper class people were the only ones that could be there, and they didn't go there that frequently. So that shit.
Yeah, like that's I tried to play MechWarrior one time, and it was really expensive because I spent the first hour essentially familiarizing myself with the cockpit of the MechWarrior machine cockpit that you're piloting, and it occurred to me at one point, for the amount of time that I would have to spend to actually be able to fluently operate that interface, I could probably just compile my own setup for my computer and enjoy it myself. But the thing about it that I didn't like was, unlike a flying game where it's pretty much instantaneously familiar, if you've played any arcade flyer or a driving game, which is instantaneously familiar because we've all spent our lives in cars and thinking about driving them fast, hopefully if you're getting into a racing game of some kind. Unlike any of those kind of interfaces, this one was so unfamiliar. It was like not like it wasn't even like a helicopter. It was just completely different. And there was all this stuff that it could do that I had no idea what it did, but I know that if I had pressed that one button, I might have lived. I can't imagine anyone spending the thousands of dollars that one would have to spend to use those things enough to become a successful pilot of a MechWarrior, when they could just spend that money on themselves and have their own mech interface at home.
Yeah, I definitely remember putting some money into that game and being immediately disappointed about how difficult it was.
Oh God, it was so
to
hard.
learn. And it's like, You basically just throw your money away when you play it. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't worth it. I spent seriously, I spent way too much time and just being frustrated, getting just blown away by the computer or by some other random person who didn't realize that I wasn't, that I wasn't the target. They're just shooting at anything you see.
Well, that's like whenever VR arcades were first coming out, I can imagine the impetus to try to open one up and then do like an hourly rate or something, but it's gonna eventually fall apart because it's really difficult to get good at something in that short time. So like the idea that somebody's gonna pay $15 only to be frustrated and have that be when by the time they're just getting used to it, it's like, okay, time's up. That shit is gonna be so frustrating for so many people that once they get to the end of that hour, they're not going to want to go to another hour, especially if they got like sick, which that happens after about an hour anyway. It's like, oh, they're going to just have this terrible association of like not a fun time. They got sick and then it was overpriced and then VR goes away. Because of the inaccessibility of the arcades to actually give reasonably priced experiences.
Didn't one of Meta's lead developers just leave because he's done with the way that they're kind of attempting to do their virtual environment? I think I just read about that.
Yeah, they lost a lot of people. And yeah, I think one of their leads left, but they are having a hard time getting Zuckerberg to change direction because I think what was it? The one that just left was what they're building is not actually creating anything that's fun.
The head of their virtual reality platform left in August 26, and then John Carmack, who is also he was known for VR work on Doom and Quake. He's also leaving. He said that leaving Meta is the end of a decade of career, or of a decade in VR. That sucks. Good for him. Knowing when to jump ship is a very important skill.
Yeah, for sure.
What is it? The number 3 investor of Tesla is like, we need a real CEO. We've got an absent executive.
Well, it's just funny to see the faith in Elon finally falling apart, where I know we had talked about it for over a year now at this point. And it's
well, people are
they're finally catching up.
They have a few people who are repeat buyers, but a lot of people who buy electric cars don't go for round 2. They go back to gasoline cars apparently. And the sales figures are still strong, but they are not climbing as high as expected. And it doesn't have to do with chip shortages or material or supply chain issues. It's confidence in the vehicles. Also, I think that the subscription model works for some car companies better than others, and certain features that are expected can't be part of a subscription model. And I think there's been some backlash to the subscription models. Obviously, I don't think that people who are buying a Lexus or a Mercedes, I don't think they care. But I think that somebody who buys a Toyota or a Subaru or apparently Teslas, they seem to care about the subscription model. And it also looks like Teslas have kind of overshot their market. But time will tell. They're like a decade in, and they're a very successful company, and they've gotten glorious reviews.
Yeah, and it's like I think the issue was they didn't really have a ton of direct competition.
Nope.
And it's not because the other companies didn't try; they just didn't try hard. It's like, yeah, other companies released EVs and failed, as if that represents them making a huge effort and a huge push. But now I think we're seeing like the real efforts by Ford and Chevy to start producing EV cars and trucks. And then we're going to see in like 2 or 3 years from now, is Tesla going to be able to rival like a Chevy F-150 or what is it? Chevy Silverado fucking electric or a Ford F-150 electric? Will Tesla be able to rival those?
I mean,
And
Mazda's going to go all electric by the end of the decade. And I think Subaru is going to be all electric by the end of the decade. And Toyota has plans for an entire all electric line to replace or supplant their current gasoline line. It's going to be pretty interesting to see, I think, because a lot of these other, the big car companies, they've got distinct divisions that operate independently of each other. Like Ford's truck division and their car division are essentially separate companies. And it looks like Mustang is going to become its own company. And, Chevrolet is spinning off Corvette as its own company. So they're going to focus on what they do best. Meanwhile, Tesla is releasing a semi-truck. Everything I've read about their semi-truck is that it has a lot of features that seem like they were designed without having consulted somebody who actually drives a semi-truck. Like the whole putting the driver in the center of the vehicle means that they've got to get up now every time they need to lean out and talk to somebody at a gate or hand them paperwork.
oh God, it's in the center.
Yeah, and then because of the central placement, and there's no doors right next to the drivers, they've got to walk through the back through a corridor, which means that there's no space for like a cabin for like sleeping quarters, because some people are long haul truckers, so they're probably not in the target audience or market for a Tesla truck, but they've got to walk through the whole thing. And one criticism I read, this guy said that's all that means is you're going to get mud and dirt everywhere. Normally, you just get in the truck and you shake most of it off, and then the footwell gets dirty, and you can slide out of your boots. But no one's going to take their boots off like right when they get in, and then walk through the whole truck. And then the mirrors, of course, you can't access them from the front because they're too far to get. They're too far off the ground. You can't climb up the things. It's so aerodynamic. You can't reach them from the windows when they're open because from the driver's seat, there's this giant console directly to the right of the driver's seat. It just gets worse. I think the entire breakdown essentially focuses on just the cabin of the truck and how there are so many design features that are not driver centric.
Well, I had never looked at the interior of one until you said it. And that's where, like, as you said, it totally seems like they did this without actually consulting a driver. And they're like, what would be cool? And then everything that they thought would be cool, they did. And none of it's functional.
Yeah. Like, one of the comments in response was, well, maybe the trucking industry just needs to change.
Oh God!
I mean, I'm all for the trucking industry using electric vehicles, but like Mercedes makes electric semis, Renault makes electric semis. There's a bunch of semi truck manufacturers in Europe that we don't even know about here that make fully electric semis that are all successful and on the road already. I think Volvo makes a fully electrified semi, and they didn't reinvent the entire truck. They just reinvented the drivetrain and the storage system for the juice. So this is like the weirdest version. I thought Tesla was going to give cars to the masses, not deliver semi trucks to Pepsi, and only Pepsi, because they're the only ones who ponied up all the money right off the bat. Man, Pepsi got suckered so hard.
Have you seen the Geely electric semi?
I don't think so. I'm gonna look that up.
Looks like some shit out of Batman the Animated Series. It definitely looks.
That looks like a cab over semi from like the 80s, except from the future of the 80s.
Yeah.
Geely,
Totally
Hom
looks
truck.
Like it could be Optimus Prime.
That could totally be. Well, that's like the Chinese version of Optimus Prime.
Right, yeah.
See, this looks cool, and it looks like a normal truck, except it doesn't have side view mirrors. It probably just has big ass cameras, which are easier to keep clean, I bet.
Oh yeah, I didn't even notice it didn't have.
One of the other complaints about the Tesla Semi is that it has these giant tablets, one of which is in the way, and like so many things, sometimes you need to just reach down and have a button or a knob, and this thing you gotta like go through menus to get through to adjust simple things, like the place position of the mirrors, because you can't reach out the windows and just adjust them. Apparently, there are a lot of. I mean, the guy who came up with the list of complaints is, very clearly a trucker who, has put some thought into those things, because I didn't even think of those things, and I'm pretty critical of this stuff, just because it doesn't look like it's gonna work to me, because it's like too far of a departure, and like you said, it looks like they came up with a bunch of ideas on paper that look good, but in practice, like, apparently the driving position is so far back that it creates a gigantic blind spot. And also the tablet to the right of the driver is partially in the way of the A-pillar, so you have an even bigger blind spot in front of you. It's nuts. Some of the responses were, the acolytes trying to defend it, saying it was a pre-production model.
God, it looks so stupid. And I mean, it totally seems like if somebody thought that adding tablets was going to make something look futuristic, and they're like, oh, if adding a tablet makes it futuristic, let's just put 2 tablets. It'll look twice as futuristic.
We can use the same tablets that we use in the capsule, in the SpaceX capsule. We'll save some money that way. It uses the same motors. I think I read that it uses like the same motors that they're putting in the big sedan. They're just giving it big giant batteries because it produces enough power. Those motors produce plenty of power. And then not all of the motors are going to be used at all times, only when accelerating. So when it's just cruising, it's only running on like one motor set, which should be enough.
So I'm not sure if the Tesla comes with the sleeper, but the Geely has like a built-in home.
No, the Tesla doesn't have room for a sleeper because they have to walk through a corridor in the back behind it where the sleeper should be. There's storage, but there's no place for like them to. I think what it means is that it's not a long haul truck. They're not intending it to be a long haul device. It's to be returned to the yard at the end of the day for recharging. So it's like a local or regional supply truck. It's the last mile or last 50 miles type thing, or last 100 miles, 200 miles maybe. because the ones they've delivered don't have the 500-mile range. They have a 300-mile range. So it's definitely like a 100-mile, last 100-mile delivery vehicle. And then distributed the final 10 miles probably by gas and diesel. It's like there's a giant pail of the global gasoline supply, and they just took a ladle off the top. I guess you got to start somewhere, though. They could have started with all of the other manufacturers that are already delivering electric trucks, though. We didn't have to wait for Tesla's big reveal.
Well, it's just like they revealed the Optimus bot, and then the backlash came, and then they act like this should never happen. That was such a huge failure.
He's got to stop tapping into like anything that has any kind of nostalgia value. They really got to stop this. They can't do Transformers and Optimus and then deliver a semi truck that kind of looks like it could be a Transformer, but it's definitely not. They got to stop this crap. They got to stop naming shit after other things. They got to come up with a whole new naming convention. Otherwise, they probably will. Once the era of Elon is over and they have some like the guy, the shareholder who demands a new CEO, he was saying that he wants someone that's like Tim Cook and is very dedicated and is just going to be there and do the job. Once they have someone like that, I think they'll have to come up with a new naming convention so that they can get out of the shadow of Elon, or like a phoenix rising from the ashes type situation.
Oh man. Well, I just can't imagine like who comes after him. Can anybody come into the spotlight and ever do this again? Because
I don't know, but if they hire Tim Cook to run Tesla to deliver cars, we're going to get Apple cars.
Well, I mean, that's going to be done in a boardroom as like an executive. Like he's not going to be doing that shit on Twitter publicly.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
oh, no.
He's actually going to be running a company where, I mean, like the way Elon has been masquerading as running companies and then on Twitter the whole time making bad jokes as if like that is going to push his companies past just being profitable because people are into his like personality cult. But he was making it seem as if he could like personality cult his way into results. Well, time is passing and he's not producing results. How many people after like Elizabeth Holmes and Elon Musk and like Pharma Bro, how many people can personality their way to like this anymore? And it's like, I don't know if the tech bro personality cult is ever going to happen again in the same way, because it's been exploited. Like Sam Bankman-Fried, people, he might have been the last one, and he burnt out before anybody actually got to know him besides the like big players. Like Tom Brady knew who he was, and Shaq knew who he was, and like Maxine Waters knew who he was. But like if you went up to the average person before FTX blew up and were like, who's Sam Bankman-Fried? Nobody would fucking know who the fuck that guy is. And the only reason they know now is because he fucked a bunch of people over. So it's like, how many more of those people can exist? Like, I don't see this happening too many more times where I see them trying.
Binance just lost $5 billion of liquidity because of this bullshit. $5 billion's a lot.
Well, they were already under investigation.
Yeah, I know. Poor bastards. Poor bastards.
Well, and it's funny too, because like on the one hand, I don't think CZ is like a terrible person, but Binance is laundering a shitload of fucking dirty money. Like, let's keep it real. Like, Binance.com, not necessarily anymore, but the only way they got as big as they did is by not giving a fuck if people were like setting up accounts remotely. So it's like, I know I definitely had an account there up until like 2021 when they finally started actually blocking. It wasn't because it's like you could use a VPN to get around the IP blocking in the US.
Well, you had to.
Yeah, you had to, but they just weren't doing their due diligence actively. And if anybody had a VPN, you could set up an account, but then it was finally like, oh, now you have to like do your AML KYC in what 2020 or 21. So then my account is finally gone because I'm definitely not doing AML KYC over there.
Yeah, no.
So it's like, yeah, of course. Oh, now you finally add that. Well, now I can't have an account anymore. But you're damn right I could up until then, and I could trade and I could withdraw because their fucking standards weren't that high. So like, I wasn't laundering money, but I know the lax perimeters that they had. I know a shitload of people were because they made it easy to. So it's like they're definitely not perfect or good actors in the sense of like SBF and FTX are under the gun now, but it's only a matter of time before Binance goes up on some other shit.
Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to see how that tower of cards comes down, because right now we're seeing people who are heavily invested making a stink of it, and I think it can only get worse.
Well, the funny thing is now people are finally starting to rat on each other. And we called this weeks ago before it got to this point. And so one of the funniest things about this is like getting back to the Scorpion. When people are under duress, they're going to start ratting. That's what people do. It's like it was inevitable that as soon as the fucking judicial pressure started coming down, somebody's gonna start ratting.
Man,
well, at least one person has ratted on Sam, and then now it looks like his girlfriend or whatever, Caroline, is potentially working with authorities. So it's like, who can rat the fastest? Is where they're at now.
It's funny. Like Robin season is uniquely tied to the weather, but ratting season can happen anytime.
Oh man, that's so true. But it's definitely ratting season over at FTX.
Oh man, there's part of me that truly enjoys watching this stuff happen, because these motherfuckers think they're so smart. They think they're just pulling one over on everyone, and for a while they get away with it. It's like in every allegory about criminals, they get greedy. They don't know when to stop. They don't know when to get out. They probably can't get out. I mean, like every mob allegory, when somebody wants out, the only way out is in the ground or with some cement shoes. But he didn't want out. He was in the Bahamas. He was flying his private jet with his phone on it to other countries to try and throw the trail off, which didn't work. So,
well, apparently the Bahamian facilities are so terrible, he's no longer going to fight extradition. Get me the fuck out of here. Let me go to America and face the trial, please. Because I guess, like, you know, when you got a penthouse in the Bahamas, sleeping on a fucking
Cement and dirty cement
prison
floor.
bed is a huge difference.
Man,
Big change.
obviously the lesson is just don't do that shit.
Right.
Don't be a criminal, and you won't have to go to a Bahamian prison.
I think it's that easy, right?
God. Actually, I bet it's a lot easier to end up in a Bahamian jail than most people think it is. I bet it's really easy, actually. Because we don't hear the stories of like college students on spring break going to like Bolivia or Paraguay or the Bahamas and going to jail. We only hear the glory stories. But surely there are some that end up in jail for a little while and their parents have to like arrange for them to be released.
Oh, his parents probably going to prison too.
Oh, shit. Well, when the grift runs deep, got to go for the whole hand.
They both already got taken off of their classes for next semester. Institutions started putting some distance in between them.
Oh, man. You'd think that if they were actually as smart as they thought they were, they would have done the analysis and they would realize that there are too many potential outcomes that result in prison time. And they would have said, you know, we can come up with a better way to do things. But they didn't. So obviously they're not as smart as they think they are. And this isn't like the first time that somebody's screwed up and ruined things for a bunch of people. It's just like a huge portion of the crypto economy, and it just happened to involve a bunch of really high-profile people. They want answers. They demand answers. And he said that he's not gonna speak before Congress or something like that, which I think is funny because, like, when the whole thing happened, he said he'd totally be willing to go before Congress and explain things. I wonder what changed.
Well, at this point, he was like, people are claiming that he got arrested so that the Congress people who he colluded with would be exempt from his like testimony, which is kind of an absurd conspiracy theory. But it's funny to see people like trying to do mental gymnastics on what's happening.
That's not how
right, exactly. That's not how that works at all. That's not how that works at all. But to see people try to like,
if anything, his arrest opens up everyone else to discovery.
Yeah,
it opens up everyone in his phone.
Exactly.
Every single email.
That's definitely not a rational conspiracy response. But it's funny to see like people on the right try to spin their theories, and then people on the left try to spin their theories as if this is like anything to do with politics and not just rich people screwing over people. Like,
well, I mean, I guess there could be in the future laws or legislation that's focused on cryptocurrency exchanges and gambling that would or could protect people from something, but I don't think so. Because then they would have to admit that crypto is either a bank or a casino. They're not going to get federal insurance for crypto unless it's a bank. And
on that note,
and if it's a casino,
there was no insurance on FTX at all. They had zero insurance on, at one point, what was a $32 billion organization.
Oh,
none.
Man.
No insurance. What? Zero.
That's like the definition of recklessness.
Not one type of insurance.
That's so reckless.
Like my apartment is insured for more than FTX as a $32 billion organization was insured for. Anything above zero. So if you got like insurance on like a lawnmower or something. That lawnmower is more insured than fucking FTX. Like, I got insurance on my laptop.
Man, I bet they try to do some last minute shuffling of property so that FTX on paper wouldn't be worth as much. I bet there's a whole list of shit that the company purchased at one time and then sold back to Fried for like a penny.
No, they didn't even go that far.
They weren't even that clever.
No.
Well, then they're definitely not as smart as they pretended to be.
No, and it's way worse. They would like just use customer funds and then buy properties and put it in his name without even like selling it to him.
They wouldn't even run it through the shell.
No, not even through the shell.
Oh
they just like buy it and give it to them. They did that to his parents. His parents have $121 million worth of property that were bought by the organization for them. So they didn't even like what you're saying. That would have like given them at least a layer of protect, like not even really protection. At least it looks like. Well, okay. Let me.
No, it would have buffered them. It could have buffered them.
It would have buffered them from having that being clawed back. So yes, it would have buffered that capital or property from like as long as they're registered as like an LLC, like anything that was in his personal property would not be able to go after if the company went bankrupt. But they didn't do that. They didn't even go that extra step.
That's just like some paperwork. They could
because then they would. That's where they were buying the stuff with the premise that it was like, oh, if I buy $100 million worth of property, well, the company's going to use it. So then that's why they all lived in the same place and they all started dating because it was like the properties were being bought under the premise that they were company properties. So then the company would treat these properties like communes. So that's where the way they treated it, they thought that they were probably getting away with it because in their own little drugged up worlds, like they got away with it for so long, they thought they would keep getting away with it, is what it comes down to. And they kept escalating. And the way I'm seeing the shit, like it was going to fall apart eventually. Just as all shell companies do, but because they could not control themselves and control their spending is what actually brought it down faster in the sense of like, I guess at one point, dude tried to, or he wanted to do like a $100 million Taylor Swift sponsorship. And people were like, dude, you can't do this. That's just a waste of money. Like getting Taylor Swift to become an FTX spokesperson for $100 million is a huge waste. And he, in his mind, thought it was not a waste, but it was like, that was one of the final straws when it came to like what broke the internal camel's back as far as them starting to split. And it's like you see, who was it? Tom Brady and Gisele Bündchen, Larry David, Shaq,
Matt Damon.
Matt Damon. Oh, Matt Damon. No, he was crypto.com.
Oh, sorry.
Well, maybe he did FTX too. He might have done FTX too.
I just wanted to do the Team America reference.
But there's all these people who were paid. Oh, and the one dude, Kevin O'Leary, he's the Shark Tank dude who keeps he like keeps tripling and quadrupling down as if like he would have made the same mistake because he's embarrassed. And obviously anybody who like got duped by this guy isn't gonna want to look like an idiot, but this guy Kevin O'Leary keeps going like, oh, you know, we gotta wait for the facts to come out, and we gotta we gotta find the data and we gotta see everything before we make any judgments. And it's like, dude, there's so much shit out that can have judgments made on it. For him to keep saying this clear, like he might be going to prison for some other shit, but he's like clamoring to make it seem like it's not as bad as it is. So it's weird to see all the fallout around this. But again, I'm like, is this is probably like the last time we see this happen, right? Like, because Elon's kind of the same thing. His shit just hasn't completely fallen apart yet. It's falling apart.
Well, his empire was bigger.
Right.
To begin with, when it started to crumble like this.
He's lost more than Sam total by now. But Sam went from like 32 billion to negative.
So in the last year, Elon has lost more than like the rest of the world made or something like that. Is that what I understand?
Probably right. And his fanboys would say that's a good thing.
Wait.
As if somehow that makes him smarter.
But that's like, I mean, that's exactly why that number 3 Tesla's shareholder guy wants a different CEO. Because he's losing money too. 60%'s a lot. I mean, it's a lot. That's a huge loss. But then again, that's just another reflection of how flawed the economy is when it can the value of something can just shift so abruptly.
I guess to Sam's credit, Elon burned more buying Twitter than Sam ever was worth.
Oh man! Well, he's trying to sell people shares in Twitter for like $55 almost, because that's how much he paid.
Oh, that's gonna. What was it? Seward's Folly selling Alaska, or no, the purchase. They thought it was him.
Oh, the Louisiana purchase, the purchase of Alaska. Because I'm pretty sure TJ orchestrated the deal for the Louisiana purchase for like $700,000. Man. I mean, we could also probably tack on decades worth of unnecessary military spending, but like the F-35, that's a great folly too.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the F-35 crash recently. It was like a vertical takeoff landing. Did not go well. It's like, do that shit just do that shit virtually and you won't have to worry about it.
There was a recent demonstration dogfight test where an F-16, actually an F-2, I believe, defeated an F-35 in aerial combat. An ancient-ass F-16 platform defeated a, 5th-generation fighter. Yeah.
Well, it's like, I think the goal was to be the most versatile, and then being so versatile, it's like not very situation specific.
I mean, he got taken down by an aircraft that's probably older than either of us. Like, ouch. So much for technology, improving things. It turns out that an old, experienced fighter pilot still has something to offer, which shouldn't be a surprise.
Yeah, I think, this gets back to can you over-engineer something to make it unusable? It's like, the answer is yes.
Twitter. Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Space Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Radio.
Set course for Earth.
Exceptional Radio.
Engage base drive. Digital modulation of genetic code commence.